Well, good morning and thanks for coming along. I know 10:15 is an early start, but we've got a lot to get through in the responsible tourism agenda today. The first of the three panel sessions in here today is on wildlife and captivity and tourism. It's an area which is very fraught, I think, ethically and in terms of the sustainability. And those of you who saw the film yesterday will have seen the tusk dimension of this, the ivory poaching, and the question of what tourism can contribute to getting local people to value tourism. But I think most of the presentations you're going to hear this morning are focused rather on some of the ethical questions. We're going to start with Daniel Turner, and then Dylan, and then David Nash. So, Daniel from Born Free, do you want to come and give the first presentation? Thank you. Each speaker has got 5 minutes, and then the red light goes, at which point they have to leave the podium. So, you green.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm from the Born Free Foundation. We're an international wildlife charity working on all animal matters around the world. And we've been working with the travel industry from a collaborative perspective for over 20 years. Today I'm going to focus on cetaceans in captivity, a hot topic at the moment, and to give you an insight into that. There are over 360 facilities keeping over 3,500 individual cetaceans, which would be dolphins, whales, porpoises, and they're involved in various activities from performances to photographic opportunities where people pay for photographs holding or sitting next to the cetaceans. And then there's the swim with facilities that you find very much in the Caribbean region. Collaboration is a key to the work that we do. Many would regard us as a pressure group, which I suppose we are, but we also believe in collaboration. So whether it's collaborating with like-minded organisations, such as in the Dolphin Area Free Europe Coalition, focused on European issues, or whether it's working on a global context with the World Cetacean Alliance. And we also work with industry, particularly the travel industry, whether it's associations such as ABTA or individual companies such as those listed there. So the facts, and these are facts, not myths, supported very much by science, indicates that cetaceans are wide-ranging, highly complex species that require complex environments. So keeping them in a tank, concrete box, in the middle of a city is inappropriate for the individual, but also for the species. Thankfully, the tide is turning. People are changing their attitudes, thanks to BBC documentaries and the like that give a true insight to these animals and their needs. People are starting to not buy the tickets, not go to the dolphin area or captive dolphin facilities, and we're seeing a number of facilities completely changing their approach and some of them closing due to poor attendance. From an opinion perspective, a lot of our opinion polls have focused on the EU. That's where we tend to spend most of our time and effort. And as you can see, that there is a change of public opinion, even in the United States, where people are choosing now not to see the animals in captivity and instead vote for seeing these animals in the wild in their natural context. As far as solutions, and that's really where we're pushing forward as far as our collaboration, we want to improve standards in the current facilities that exist, and that we can only do by working with the travel industry and also the progressive suppliers, those that recognise that change is important. And also looking forward, we want to ensure that any animals that are displaced from closed facilities are rehomed in coastal or seaside sanctuaries where they're provided an opportunity to thrive, and in some cases, the lucky few will be rehabilitated for release. There are some sanctuaries in the pipeline, thankfully about 7 at the moment across the world, and we're working with all those partners to ensure that they are as the gold standard. And then for the animals that are in the wild, to ensure that whale watching and dolphin watching is again at the highest standard possible, and working with partners in the World Cetacean Alliance, we're ensuring that is the case. Thank you for your attention.
Yay. Morning, everybody. My name's Dylan Walker. I work for the World Cetacean Alliance. It's the largest global partnership working to protect whales and dolphins, and includes partners including World Animal Protection and the Born Free Foundation, who are here with us today. So thank you guys for being part of the Alliance. I want to talk about getting back to nature, really, and I'd like to have a focus on whales and dolphins, but also talk about the wider wildlife tourism industry. I want to start with this. 50 tons of wild animal leaping out of the ocean in front of tourists. Hands up who would like to see this if I could take you tomorrow. Hands up. Come on, it's pretty amazing. It doesn't get much more amazing than that in the wild. Absolutely fantastic. And do you know what else is really fantastic? I think that whale and dolphin tourism has really helped to actually save and protect these whales, humpback whales, in the wild. It's been one of the biggest things that we've been able to say to stop whaling. We've been able to say that the commercial advantages of these animals alive far outweigh a dead animal for its meat to be processed. So that's one thing, but also it's led to a whole bunch of marine protected areas and whale sanctuaries to protect these animals' habitats. So how fantastic is it that tourism has played a major role in that? But also, protecting whales and dolphins comes with its surprises. There are other benefits. Sorry about this image so early in the morning. So this is whale poop, I believe I'm supposed to call it. And scientists have recently revealed that whale poo around the oceans actually is a really important carbon sequester. Hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon are sequestered from the atmosphere back into the oceans because whales are basically bringing large quantities of nutrients back to the surface, and that allows plankton to grow, the plants of the sea, and absorb that carbon dioxide. So by saving whale populations, we actually can help with climate change. So I think this is all really fantastic and positive news potentially for the tourism industry, for people going out to see whales and dolphins in the wild. However, warnings. Many of you will be familiar with the shark finning issue. It's decimated shark populations across the world, and there was a very recent WWF report came out that said that 58% of the world's wildlife has disappeared in the last 40 years. 4,000 vertebrate species were studied. 58%. I mean, that is an absolutely massive number. And I think what's really, really interesting is that the tourism and the travel industry has on its shoulders right now the responsibility of actually saving species and habitats from extinction. We might not be ready for that responsibility, but it's there, and we have a huge obligation and potential to make the difference. So my personal opinion is that tourism will be the biggest thing that saves whale sharks. The biggest thing that saves tigers, arguably already has been. The biggest thing that saves some of the great apes, including gorillas. The biggest thing. And many dolphin species that are threatened, and whale species that are threatened in the wild. So this is a really sort of important moment. And I just want to touch on the things that Daniel mentioned about captivity, just with one thing. The captive industry campaigns, the campaigns to get things like killer whales and dolphins out of captivity into wild, for me it's been the biggest public demonstration where people have been out on the streets with placards since the Save the Whales campaign of the 1970s and 80s. That's how passionate people have felt about this particular issue. And I think it's because they understand the context now of what these animals are in a captive environment and what they are in the wild. And people want to see them in the wild, and they want to protect them and to be with them in the wild. So I think that's the potential. I think that's where the travel industry is heading. I think it's really exciting. It comes with some huge challenges as well. You know, we have to do this responsibly. How do we move more and more people out into our natural environments, get close to these animals, but do it in a way that doesn't have a huge impact upon them? So these are the challenges that we face, and that's the end of my little pitch. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Dylan. Joe, you're next up. Joe Hendricks from Global Spirit, who's been working, Global Spirit and Joe have been working very closely with the travel industry on some of these issues.
Thank you, Harold. I'm going to read my notes potentially, otherwise I will never stick to the 5 minutes, so apologies if I don't look up directly all of the time. But thanks for asking us to speak today, Harold. For those of you that don't know us, Hayley, down at the front there, my business partner, and I created Global Spirit in 2014. And our work focuses on assessing animal attractions in line with the ABTA guidance. And we look to support the industry on helping the industry to meet those requirements. And we also hold training events for the industry. And we've got one coming up on the 14th of December this year where we look to share information, share ideas, share potential solutions with people. What we've been asked for today, though, are our thoughts on 2 main points here on the screen. The difference, potentially, between how to engage or how to create a successful campaign and why do animals seem to favour over child protection campaigns in tourism. Now, we're not sure if we're really the right people to be able to answer that question, but we wanted to put some thoughts together and perhaps look at what the definition of a successful campaign is, and perhaps that's really in the eye of the beholder. So we want to put some ideas and thoughts out there to potentially progress those discussions. So let's have a look at something that we know about. It's the standard animal welfare campaign, and is that the type of campaign that's likely to be successful? And again, we kind of think it's about the audience that you're targeting. There are operators that have stopped specific activities down to being a target of a campaign, but most of them have also put a lot of careful thought into that before they've decided to make those changes. I think one thing that we look at as Global Spirit is maybe instead of asking, is that campaign approach successful, that we would instead ask what changes for the animal as a result of that campaign. Is it a positive outcome? And equally, we'd apply that same thought process to campaigns that are related to children and to child protection in tourism. Let's use elephants as another example. So many campaigns that we've come across or that we've seen in the public will focus on an activity, usually withdrawal from an activity, that's usually riding. I think one of our concerns around that is perhaps riding may stop, but the same supplier may continue to offer other questionable activities, and perhaps the day-to-day care of that elephant, after an hour of riding, it may still be chained on a short chain, have no access to water, have no access to food, forage, social, etc. So one of our concerns is that potentially that a campaign that focuses on an activity may not necessarily look at the day-to-day care of the elephants. Is that going to be a successful one? Does that address the concerns? That's something for us to look at discussing. The bottom image there, another type of elephant-focused campaign from the Mahoots Foundation, which is an organisation we work quite closely with. They also campaign, but they do that from a format of a solutions-based approach. So they're looking to offer people homestay opportunities where they can track elephants in the wild from a respectable distance and provide livelihoods for those mahouts. Is that a successful campaign? Well, they've managed to rehome 4 elephants. So for 4 elephants, it's successful. Not necessarily for all of the elephants in Thailand and Asia, but it's a different approach, and it's just about seeing what works. And I think, again, it's really down to whether or not the what the achievements or what the objectives of that campaign have been and what success is in the eye of the beholder. We also wondered whether or not maybe the question would be more about engagement rather than success. So how and why do people become engaged with campaigns, and why do people have perhaps more affinity to an animal welfare campaign than they do to a child protection campaign? Some of the pictures have not come up on there. Campaigns use images and they tell you stories. So how likely are you to become engaged with campaigns based on what you see there? Some of those images aren't very nice, but you're going to be drawn to different images depending on who you are, depending on your personality, depending on what you connect to. So is it children or is it animals for you? One of the things we thought maybe some of the staged images potentially when we look at child protection in tourism, is it that they don't make it quite so obvious, quite so shocking because it's staged? Is it potentially because animals don't literally have voices, even though we could, of course, argue children don't have voices, but an animal physically can't speak? Is that why people are more prone to supporting animal welfare campaigns than child protection? Or are people just so horrified by what other people could do to other human beings that perhaps they care about it, but they really feel they can't make a difference? I think it's important for us to say campaigns are really important. Red lights come on, so I'm going to get down very, very soon. They really make people think. They do make people engage, sometimes in the short term, sometimes in the long term. But I think it's really important about the end goal. So for a campaign to be successful, does your game plan take you to the end goal that you want to achieve? And again, I think that success is in the eye of the beholder.
Joe, it's always very refreshing when one of the speakers actually addresses the question that was asked. So thank you very much for that. David, you're up next. David Nash from the Canned Hunting Campaign.
Thanks. There are lots of lions in South Africa. Does anybody know how many, roughly? Just to hazard a guess, ballpark figures. Okay, it's about 11,000. Does anybody know what percentage of that are born and bred in captivity? Yeah, higher than that. It's about 8,000 lions are out of the 11,000 born and bred in captivity in South Africa. So what's captive lion breeding and canned hunting? It's a multi-million pound industry. It involves around 8,000 lions bred in 200 farms. It's legal and encouraged in South Africa. And lions are shot by so-called hunters who pay $5,000 upwards to shoot them, often shooting them off the pictures on the internet. The bones are often sold into the lion tiger bone trade. Catch is a South African NGO dedicated to stopping lion hunting and captive lion breeding in South Africa. That is our sole objective. We're not alone, as you will see. The activities are paralleled by a number of other NGOs across the world. So what's lion breeding got to do with tourism? Well, it's quite simply, tourism directly subsidises this industry. Tourists pay quite a lot of money to volunteer at lion farms to bring up the lion cubs, to pet lion cubs, to walk with young lions. We estimated that in 2015, the largest such facility in South Africa was earning potential 3 or 4 million rand from volunteer tourists. Secondly, tourism is critical to South Africa's economy, so image matters. These are the figures from the South African government statistics for 2013. 40 million overseas visitors, employing 4.4% of the South African population and bringing in 3% of GDP. So brand South Africa is very important. So what are we doing about it? First of all, we have a big focus on raising awareness. When I say we, I don't just mean Catch, I mean all the other NGOs and bloggers who support our aims and objectives. In 2014, there were 66 global marches in 62 cities worldwide protesting against canned hunting. We challenge the marketing which attracts the tourists, essential for research and conservation. In 99 cases out of 100, this is simply not true. The cubs are orphans. Well, they're orphans because they've been removed from their mothers at 3 or 4 weeks, who are in a cage 2 away. so that they can be bottle fed by volunteers and become human habituated. They're well treated. Well, it depends what you mean by well treated for a wild predator. Kept in small cages, not allowed the normal freedoms that they would have. They'll be released. Well, no, but almost no recorded lions have been ever released into the wild. They can't fend for themselves. We engage with the tourist industry. We work directly with volunteer tourism operators. We engage with ABTA. Colleagues from a Netherlands charity Spots engage with ANVR, the Netherlands equivalent. And we have a list of ethical projects and operators that is growing day by day. Equally importantly, we engage with the South African government. We recently sent this report to the South African Department of Tourism, highlighting the damage that canned lion hunting and breeding was causing to the South African image abroad. Here are some of the headlines. 9 campaigns, 62 global marches, 11 online petitions, trophy import bans in 4 countries, 42 airlines worldwide banning lion trophies, huge amount of media coverage. TV, feature film, Blood Lions, seen in 175 countries, 28 TV programs and videos. This is a headline from the largest circulation Saturday newspaper in South Africa. Canned lion hunting ripping into South Africa's image abroad, report shows. This was in response to our report. As an example, this is a very recent example, elephant poaching costing African nation millions in lost tourism revenue. That's a recent report showing it illustrates underlines the links with tourism and image. So why care about animals over humans? Well, for us it's not an either or, but I just simply want to make three brief points. First, we share a common ancestry and a wider environment. Second, animals have no advocates of their own and very few rights under law. But last and not least, I think, abused animals are abused for one reason only. They're abused by exploitation by us humans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks for actually addressing the questions I asked to be addressed during this session. The final presentation, and I must congratulate all the panel so far, Alex, on being in their 5 minutes, so all the pressure's on you now.
Thanks for that.
So this is Alex from World Animal Protection.
Yes, morning everybody, and thanks for inviting us to speak. Yes, just wanted to briefly tell you a little bit about our campaign, Wildlife Not Entertainers. And just to start with, just to go back to basics, and it's been touched on by some of the other speakers today about why we're even campaigning on this issue and why it's important. This is a photo of a young elephant that I met in Chiang Mai in Thailand in March of this year. It was in one of the elephant camps. There was a coachloads of people arriving as I did to go and buy tickets to ride adult elephants in the same venue. Just around the corner from the car park, I found this elephant, amongst others, in quite small pens, probably half the size of this stage, chained up with absolutely no food or water, reaching out, had absolutely no enrichment in its cage. And its destiny is to be ridden. That's why it's there. That's why it's being raised in that way, to tame it, to domesticate it to a point where it can accept people on its back. And this is a wild animal. It's not a domesticated animal. And that's why it has to be treated in that way in order to let tourists ride it. This is also its destiny. This is a bull hook, which is one of the common tools that you will see that the mahouts use to keep elephants in check. When they're younger, they use tools like this to beat them and to make sure that they're tamed in the way that they need to be. And this really is the inspiration behind our campaign, is seeing individual animals like this affected every day and doing what we can to try and help them to get out of this industry. Similarly, just another example, is there's a trend at the moment for going to tiger farms or tiger parks and having your photo taken with them or having selfies taken with them. Again, a similar story. Tiger cubs are often taken from their mothers very young, again subjected to severe treatment by their owners in order to be tame enough to then sit next to tourists like this person on the right hand side and obviously not to then attack a person that they otherwise might do if they were in the wild in their natural environment. Now, these are just two examples of the many attractions that World Animal Protection is hoping to put a stop to. We began our campaign in 2012 in the Netherlands and a couple of other European countries, but it resonated so well with the public. It really struck a nerve with people when they found out about this hidden cruelty behind these attractions, that we decided to make it a global campaign. And as part of that, we commissioned the University of Oxford Wild Crew, which is their sort of wildlife conservation research unit, to do some analysis of what the top 10 cruellest activities might be. And they based this on animal welfare and conservation criteria. I won't go into the methodology now, but happy to share that with anyone afterwards who's interested. And these are the top 10 activities that they came up with. And obviously, this has been the basis of a lot of the work that we're now doing in terms of talking both to tour operators and tourists themselves. And then in terms of what this campaign has actually achieved so far, over 100 tour operators worldwide, including TUI and Intrepid and some of the other big names, have already pledged to stop selling elephant rides. Many of them have already stopped completely. And also we're speaking to many of them about having a wider animal welfare policy, so that they're seeing beyond elephants, they're seeing the other attractions that I listed earlier, and really wanting to incorporate that into their policies as well. More recently, you may have seen the news about TripAdvisor. Now, we were successful in getting over 500,000 petition signatories to really push that through. It was the result of years and years of campaigning by many other NGOs as well, including many of those here today. But we really saw that as a huge step forward in the industry, as well as the 100 tour operators that signed up, in terms of really seeing a shift in what's happening around this topic. Just to address as well what Joe was saying earlier, I think it's absolutely right. The end goal is not just stopping these rides and what actually does happen to these animals, and it's a really, really good point, and something that we take very seriously. And we have been ever since the start of the campaign, and continue to make it a priority to speak to and talk to venues in these countries and to try and find a way to help them to transition to a type of venue that is actually elephant or other animal friendly, because we absolutely want to make sure that the animals that are already caught up in this industry have a future, and that they're not just trapped in this cycle. Obviously, we would welcome any other tour operators who would be interested to talk to us about what they can do, and throughout next year, we'll be talking more directly to tourists themselves as well about how their behaviour can change, what they should be looking out for when they're on holiday, to make sure that they're not supporting animal cruelty. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alex. Would the panellists please come and take a chair here? I'm going to indulge myself by having the first question. Please come and take a seat. Can I ask the audience first, have any of you been persuaded to give to any of these animal charities? Most of them have given you a pitch. But have any of you decided you're going to go out and subscribe and send them some money? 1. 2, perhaps. Can I suggest that we now stop doing these pitches for who's done most work on this, and come back to the topic that we wanted to discuss? Can you take it back to that slide for me? No, the one at the end of David's presentation, the one with the list of 3 points on it. Yeah, I think we might use this, because the question that I posed is, why do we care about animals more than humans? And there's some very great similarities. I mean, okay, animals don't have a voice for themselves, neither did children. Yeah? Children don't volunteer to be taken photographs with and to be cuddled. Neither do lions or tigers, unless they're trapped into it. And the one that will probably cause most offence if I raise it, but let's raise it, is that a lot of people think that significant numbers of significant numbers of orphans in orphanages are not really orphans. And we saw somebody make the same point about lions in the canned hunting, David, yeah? That they're not actually orphans, they've been orphaned in order to create a tourist attraction. So you've got lots of similarities, but I really want to focus on this fundamental question of why there are so many charities focused on animal welfare and so few on children. Does anybody want to give a crisp answer to that? Joe, you've been active on both sets of issues, and you've ended up working on animal welfare, and I understand why. I'm not criticising that at all. But you're in a good position to comment on why you think there's been more success on animal welfare than on child welfare.
I can have a go at it. I don't know if I'm in the best position or the most informed position. And some of the things that we threw out there from the slides, really, I mean, it's true what we say, you know, the children don't necessarily have a voice, or maybe they do have a voice but don't want to actually voice what's happening to them. But I was speaking to the lady who won the gold yesterday from with the Child Protection project. And she actually said, so I don't know if she's in the room, she did say that she might come today, but she did make a good point when we were chatting at the networking, that in one sense, it's to not want to help, let's say, via orphanage tourism. It's almost challenging people to not want to help people in a way. And she, I don't know if I'm making sense with that, but people really do want to go out there and make a contribution to help other people. And people would look at orphanages from years and, you know, hundreds of years ago potentially as that's a place where we want to go and we want to put some time and we want to help. And what we're almost challenging people is saying, or in a way maybe it's coming across as don't help people. And that's just it's difficult for people to be able to understand what they can do. And maybe people just haven't got, in a way they do have for animals, a clear set of activities or steps they can follow to feel that they're making a difference.
David, I want to come to you, because it seems to me that those volunteers who, in the same way that they may be tempted to volunteer in an orphanage, are tempted to go and work with canned lions for the same reason, that they want to help the lion. Yeah? But actually what you're saying is that's part of the exploitation, which is the same argument that the people campaigning against volunteerism in orphanages are making.
Yeah, absolutely. My difficulty in properly trying to answer the question that Harold put to us is that I don't know to what extent, I don't know what evidence there is about who raises more money for what and what campaigns are more successful, which is why I sort of took the line of just simply explaining why I thought there was a moral case, if you like, for helping animals. I firmly believe in both. The reason I am involved in an animal charity is nothing more dramatic than the fact that my wife does children, and I do animals, because she gets too stressed looking at all the photographs we bring home of lions and other animals. So I think it's quite hard without statistics and figures to know, but I think a lot of it is what people have said already, is emotional responses to things. I mean, it's quite, the images used of cuddly lion cubs and so forth and being kept in cages. But also, there is a feeling, I think, in the wildlife campaigning industry that governments don't do anything, whereas in some cases governments attempt to do things with people. There's not really very much government money spent on wildlife protection and animal welfare in particular. So I think that's probably why there's certainly in this country, there's a little bit more support than you might think for animals over people, as it were.
Anybody else want to comment on specific points?
Firstly, just very quickly, I think it is true as well. I mean, personally, from my view, I don't only support animal charities, I support a whole range, and I think that's the same with most people, is that we don't only fix ourselves on one issue, and I support human rights charities as much as I do animal charities, for example. But also, I mean, as much as we've stood up today and we've talked about how successful we are, as a campaigner, 99% of what we do, we don't have successes like we talk about every day. They take years and years and years of campaigning and hard work, and therefore, similarly, without sort of being able to compare two cases that might be the same, and trying to really drill down into what the strategy was and how they went about it, I think it is difficult, because charities like ours, we don't sit here and tell you what we haven't achieved. We tell you what we have achieved, and so it might appear that way. But also, just to agree with what Joe was saying, I do think that in the successes that certainly I outlined there, it was an incredibly simple ask for people. It was sign a petition to say you don't like this, And we got enough people to do that it made a difference. My very limited knowledge of child protection campaigns is they're incredibly complicated, and maybe people don't, as you said, know what they can really do to help, and whether a petition signature will really make a difference in that case, whereas it can in things like, with Blackfish or with TripAdvisor. So it might partly come down to just how it's quite a distant problem, with animals sometimes, and it's like, well, if I sign this petition, then I've done it. And in some cases, that does actually work, whereas with child protection, perhaps it's far more complicated. But that's just a personal view.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I do think it's quite a difficult one for us for me personally to answer, just because I don't have the expertise on both sides. I can't put, the counter-arguments on both sides. What I would say is I think it would be a mistake, certainly, to look at the number of animal charities that exist in the UK and extrapolate that across the wider world. I mean, the UK is a world-famous animal-loving nation. We have more people in the UK watch some of the big wildlife documentaries per head of the population than that watch the Super Bowl in the US. So, we are not the norm. We're very much at one end of the scale. So if we went to some other countries around the world, we'd probably find that the situation's flipped. That's one thing to say. I think the second thing I just want to say is that, for our organisation, about a third of the work that we personally do is with children. We go out and do a lot of school work, a lot of outreach work. So, and I'm sure a lot of the other guys on the panel do exactly the same. So actually the truth is that the work with children and animals is blurred. Animal charities work with children, and children charities work with wildlife. I was at a Wildlife Artists Award last week. So David Attenborough was there the year before, and he said, one thing that all children have is a love of drawing and a love of wildlife. So somewhere along the line, that passion gets lost. So I think these two issues are actually really sort of strongly intertwined.
I agree with largely what the other panellists have said, but I think it's also a point of public opinion as well. I mean, the charities that we all work for, the people that pay our wages are members of the public who believe that protecting animals or alleviating suffering is top of their list, and they're making those decisions. So I don't think it's a case of one or the other. I think it's just a choice that people make, and the organisations we represent, we exist because of that choice. But just on something that Dylan just said, in the Born Free Foundation, a lot of what we do from a conservation perspective has to involve people, because obviously people live alongside wildlife. We have to invest in people as much as we have to invest in wildlife protection, and our projects like Global Friends, which build schools and provide a decent education to deprived and rural communities in Africa and Asia, is testament to that. So we have to invest in people in order to invest in wildlife.
Only small point I'd like to add in the context of the discussion about wildlife and tourism specifically, it's worth bearing in mind there's a great distinction between trying to persuade commercial organisations to change their behaviour from changing governments. And most of our campaigns are involved in educating tourists and asking people to change their behaviour. Commercial organisations tend to respond much more to pressure and negative publicity than governments do. You saw the report we sent to the South African government. We've had virtually no comment on it whatsoever.
Who has a question? Who else would like to ask a question?
So my question is about the actual subject itself, and that is that we're currently discussing why care about animals over humans, but how about discussing how can tourism influence the improvement of the welfare of the animals, but also of the children being used for negative reasons in tourism? And maybe that would be an interesting discussion to have. How can we all work together to make sure both sides are improved?
We'll take another question from here. Where was the other one? Could you take the microphone?
I'm working for a Spanish tour operator, and we're specialized in adventure trip in Africa. And of course, we have a lot of activities which are dealing with wildlife. So some activities is really clearly negative, like the Cannes lions, and this is something that we never promoted, but it is something that our customer could do as optional activities, and it is something that I would like my company to take a more clear, firm statement against. So we don't promote, but I would like them, my company to clearly state that we are against that activity. But then they tell me that, but we do also include some activities that may be controversial, and I'm thinking about like the shark diving in South Africa, which that I did it to see what is it about and all what implies. But I think that sometimes the line is not very clear. When it's captive animal, it's clear. But when it is about animals in the wild, watching them, but in which condition do we watch them? About the consequences of our activity to the animals, sometimes it's not clear enough.
I'll take one more question and then we'll come back to the panel. Please make it a question.
Hello. Firstly, thank you to the panel for some interesting presentations. I'd like to ask the panel if you think that some of the recent campaigns against tourism businesses particularly are sometimes an oversimplification of the issues surrounding some of the issues surrounding particularly wild populations of animals. Issues like climate change and land use are often ignored through these campaigns, and they have a huge impact on the long-term survival of species in the wild.
Thanks very much. We're just going to go around and have a comment. You don't need to answer all three of the questions and repeat each other, okay? Please, let's just try and get answers to all three questions out. I'm going to start with you, David. And I'm afraid after this we're going to have to wrap up, so we have another session starting at 11.
Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is awareness raising is the starting point, particularly in regarding to differentiating between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. The problem in the limited area which I work in is people do not have the true facts and therefore cannot form their own opinions. At the end of the day, we can't stop people doing things they choose to do, but what we can try and stop is people doing things with their eyes closed. And tourism operators and tourism organisations can play a part in helping that, as some already do.
And just really to address that similar point, but that's sort of why the approach that we've taken as a charity is we're aware that a lot of the cruelty that happens or the suffering that happens behind closed doors, and it's not always easy to know. Just if you experience it as a tourist, am I actually seeing the full picture? And that's, I think, why our campaign has been quite successful, because it's actually revealed the stuff that happens elsewhere that the tourist doesn't necessarily see. And that's also why we work with tour operators and tourists, because we believe, tour operators are in a great position to provide advice and guidance to tourists when they come to them, and actually say with a level of authority, actually this is right and this is wrong and this is what we support and this is what we don't. And as a charity, the research I outlined, for example, is one way in which we can work with tour operators to say you can be confident in taking that view. And these are the things we would advise. Plus, also, these are the attractions that we think are okay. This is an acceptable way to interact with wild animals, because at the end of the day, people who go to these attractions, they love animals. They're going to see wildlife because they love wildlife and they don't like finding out that they've been mistreated. And so if we can give them advice about the better venues to go, then all the better.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to address the point about people going into the wild and the impacts on the animals, and the space between us and the animals is a huge issue for me, I think. And some of the most responsible tour operator partners that we work with invest a lot in science and research, and I think that's absolutely critical. We can only reassess the way that we're behaving around the animals and to reduce our impacts based on the scientific evidence of the impacts that we're having on the animals. So, I think that's absolutely key, and I really would like to see the travel industry investing more in scientific research to support the evidence of how we should go forward. And I think that would make a big difference, and that's a massive weakness and limitation for us right now.
I will be brief. I think to address Hayley's question, I think it would be great to have a solutions focus and for people to find a way to get together and look at what the potential is and build on the foundation of where we've had success and look at how we can do that together. To address the lady's question just there, in terms of wildlife viewing, Hayley and I, as Global Spirit, work to implement the ABTA guidance on wildlife viewing, so it's a consistent approach across whichever destination it is that wildlife viewing may take place in, and that helps tour operators, will give them an opportunity to take a consistent approach with all of their suppliers and make a decision from an informed place. And I think to address the question at the back, it's about that hook. So is it easier to put the animals there as the front of a campaign than it is to put climate change or land use as the frontage of a campaign? And it's perhaps what it needs to do. That campaign needs an overall focus, but maybe the hook still needs to stay the same to get people to become involved.
Yeah, I just wanted to focus on the simplification of campaigns. Whilst the messaging to the public might be customized into a simple yes and no choice, certainly behind the scenes the issues are far more complex. Just dealing with animal issues, you've got the regulations, the governments, the politicians, you've got the tourist community, you've got the customers themselves, so you have to work at all levels, and that's why my key message is collaboration. To identify common ground and work together on that common ground for change.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of comments from me. I think one of the problems about campaigns is that they're often criticised for not being complicated, but complicated campaigns never win. You have to simplify in order to effectively campaign. There is another session here. The next session in here is on destinations, and it's about to start. The one after that is on communicating responsible tourism, and that is partly about campaigning. So if you're particularly interested in the campaigning dimension, rather than necessarily the animal welfare dimension of this, I would come back for that session. It's the one after next in here. The last thing I wanted to say is that several of the people on the panel have contributed to the latest edition of Progress in Responsible Tourism, and that's the same place that the reasons for our award decisions is justified. You can find it on the Responsible Tourism Awards website if you want to find what they've had to write about these issues. But if I could ask you to thank the panel